Hi, we're glad you've come back to the Discipler Group. This is our third and final series in the Sacred Trust workshops as we continue to explore healthy boundaries. Today we're going to be looking at the topic of sexual boundaries for clergy. This can be a challenging area. We've read a lot in the newspapers and heard stories about clergy that have crossed sexual boundaries. From time to time, we all probably have found ourselves in situations that could have easily led to crossing a sexual boundary. That's why we want to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the clearer we are about healthy boundaries, the better we'll serve the church. Today, we have with us Reverend Dr. Ann Ross Stewart from the Baltimore-Washington Conference. She works for the Interfaith Counseling Services. She's been working with clergy and laity for a long time and been a great asset here in the Baltimore-Washington Conference. We're glad that she's joining us here today, and we welcome her. I want to wish you a powerful day, a hopeful day, and God's blessing in this day and in your ministry.
Good morning, Ann. Thank you for coming in this morning to discuss clergy boundary issues related to dating, friendships, harassment, and marital issues. My first question is about relationships. Given that pastors have the same basic needs as others when it comes to having friends in their lives, and that many also may wish for a marital partner, what are some of the challenges they face as they seek to meet their personal needs as well as serve as a pastor of a congregation?
There are quite a few challenges. If the pastor is single, one challenge is in the area of dating. What kind of privacy can they expect from congregants, and are there any restrictions as to whom they can date? Another challenge has to do with establishing supportive friendships within and outside the congregation. What are some of the boundaries they may need to consider?
Let's take the first challenge, that of being a single pastor who wants to date. What are some guidelines about dating for the pastor and the congregation?
It will be easiest for the congregation if the pastor who is single looks for someone to date who's not a member of the parish. Congregants are looking to their pastor to be the spiritual leader of the congregation, not to find his or her romantic needs met within the congregation. While some well-meaning parishioners may wish to play matchmaker, it should be made clear that it's not their role to help the pastor in this regard. For the young single pastor, dating outside the congregation is definitely the best plan, and it's usually true for pastors who have lost their first partner by death or divorce and may be interested in finding another partner.
Are there not some pastors in our conference who have married members of their congregation?
Yes, I do know of several pastors who have dated and then married members of their congregations. These are exceptional cases, and frankly, sometimes they've been problematic for the local congregation. Sometimes these dating situations have occurred when the pastor or the congregant has been divorced or widowed. They may be at a stage in their life that they want to establish another significant relationship. If they find someone in the congregation whom they want to date seriously, it will be important that they are clear with the local church leadership as well as the conference leadership that they are in a serious relationship. The prevailing guideline for the congregant in this situation is that they then no longer see their dating partner as their spiritual leader. If the congregant has been a member of the local congregation for some years, it's not likely that he or she will immediately want to leave their home church. However, they may need to seek out spiritual direction or guidance from someone other than their romantic partner. And should they marry the itinerant pastor, they're likely to move from their church home when the pastor moves.
So, what does a single pastor do if he or she is attracted to a member of the congregation?
He or she needs to tell the person that if they're to pursue a romantic involvement, It will disqualify the pastor from being that person's spiritual leader. And both parties need to agree to be upfront with the local congregation and the district superintendent about their serious relationship to avoid rumors or misunderstandings.
You mentioned that there may be challenges for the pastors when it comes to friendship. What are some of those challenges?
Pastors definitely need to have some friends outside of the congregation that they are serving. It's helpful to have some friends who are in ministry, as well as some friends who are not even a part of the pastor's denomination or faith. Pastors need to be able to talk about all dimensions of their lives with someone and not worry about whether that is in any way jeopardizing the pastoral relationship. With members of the congregation, the pastor is always the pastor. The pastor can certainly be friendly with everyone in the congregation. And sometimes the pastor can develop a close friendship with someone in the parish with a few safeguards in place. For instance, topics that would be off limits in a friendship with a parishioner would be discussing some of the business of the congregation, or certainly any pastoral issue involving another parishioner. The pastor would need to be careful that this friendship would not be seen as so special by others in the congregation that there would be jealousy on their part. Because of some of these difficulties involved in friendships within the parish, it's wise for most pastors to get their primary friendship needs met by people outside of the local congregation. Another difficulty that happens when there has been a close friendship with a parishioner is that both the pastor and the parishioner will have an additional sense of loss when it's time for the pastor to move.
I'm sure what you are saying about friendships applies both to pastors who are single as well as to those who are married. Isn't there also some concern that a close friendship with someone in the parish who is of the other sex, assuming the pastor is heterosexual, might develop into an affair?
Married pastors, even happily married, certainly are not immune to having sexual feelings towards a parishioner. Whether pastors are single or married, should they find themselves having sexual feelings towards a parishioner, it's their responsibility to manage those feelings appropriately. This means that the pastor does not act on those feelings with the congregant. Pastors need to have the support of a consultant, a colleague, a therapist, or a supervisor outside of their parish to be able to talk through their feelings and to be accountable for their actions.
I've heard that pastors should avoid dual relationships with parishioners. It's pretty clear that if a pastor is dating someone and that person is also a parishioner, that would constitute a dual relationship. We've already talked about how it's best to avoid that situation and how to handle it appropriately when it does occur. Are there other kinds of dual relationships that might occur, and if they cannot be avoided completely, how should they be managed?
Well, a dual relationship is any relationship in which the pastor relates to a congregant in addition to the primary role of being the person's pastor. For instance, if the member of the congregation is also a pastor's personal lawyer, or medical doctor, or even hairdresser, that's a dual relationship. Even a hired church staff member who is also a member of the congregation is in a dual relationship with the pastor. The pastor is both the spiritual leader and the supervisor of that individual. Dual relationships can be managed, but the potential for conflict over roles needs to be acknowledged up front, and both parties need to agree to work to manage the complexity involved. Minimizing the number of dual relationships that one has with parishioners is the best strategy for pastors.
There's another difficult topic that we have not yet addressed: sexual harassment. Will you first review for us a definition of sexual harassment?
Sure. There's a good definition that can be found in our Book of Discipline in the Social Principles. Sexual harassment is defined there as, quote, any unwanted sexual comment, advance, or demand, either verbal or physical, that is reasonably perceived by the recipient as demeaning, intimidating, or coercive. Sexual harassment must be understood as an exploitation of a power relationship rather than as exclusively a sexual issue.
So, if a member of a congregation feels that he or she is being sexually harassed by a pastor, what should that person do?
Sexual harassment is a form of sexual misconduct. In our conference journal, there's included a document called the Policy Statement and Protocol on Clergy Sexual Misconduct of the Baltimore-Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church. In that policy statement, it is made clear that any sexual misconduct by a clergy person, including child sexual abuse, adult sexual abuse, or sexual harassment, is a chargeable offense in our Book of Discipline. There are clear procedures outlined as to how a church member needs to go about bringing a written and signed complaint alleging sexual misconduct against a pastor. Usually, the pastor is suspended from pastoral duties for 60 days while certain investigative procedures follow. The policy document is very thorough and should be consulted whenever any sexual misconduct is alleged.
On the other hand, what if a pastor feels he or she is being sexually harassed by someone in a congregation? What should the pastor do?
That is definitely an awkward situation for the pastor, and it can happen to clergymen as well as clergywomen, although I've had more clergywomen express this as an issue. As difficult as it may be, I would suggest first trying a very direct response when an offensive remark or gesture has been made. Something along the line of, John, I need you to know that I feel very uncomfortable with the comment or joke that you just made. You may not have meant to be offensive, but I felt disrespected by it. Would you be willing to be more careful when talking with me? If the problem continues, the pastor may tell the offender that there will need to be a third party in the room whenever they have a conversation.
And are there any other practical tips when dealing with this kind of situation?
Yes, I'd say try not to be alone in the building with the person who has had a habit of being offensive. If possible, keep the door open when meeting with such a person, and make sure there are other people close by.
What if a layperson is accused of or is found to be guilty of sexual misconduct?
Again, in the minutes of our annual conference, following the policy statement on clergy sexual misconduct, there's also a policy and protocol statement on lay sexual misconduct. As in the procedure for clergy sexual misconduct investigation, a clear process is outlined. Sometimes the charges cannot be sustained, but where sexual misconduct has occurred by either clergy or a layperson, care needs to be provided for the immediate victim, the families involved, and the congregation. There are persons in the conference who are part of a sexual misconduct response team who may be called upon to assist in the process of reconciliation and healing. Professional counseling may also be helpful to those involved.
What if the pastor is having marital difficulties?
The pastor and spouse need to seek professional help if they are unable to work through their difficulties on their own. If they are unable to reconcile their marriage through counseling and a separation is forthcoming, appropriate notification needs to be made to the district superintendent and subsequently to the local congregation and the leadership there.
I'm sure there is much more to be said about all of these matters, but thank you for sharing some of your thoughts to get us all thinking about our pastors' needs when it comes to intimate relationships and sexual boundaries.
My pleasure.